Hi, I'm Tim Costello. Over the coming months, we'll be hosting a series of Stronger Together conversations, which really aims to share support for one another, to encourage one another as we face the challenge of this coronavirus. Today, I want to talk about faith in crisis. Well, a little bit about me. For 16 years, I headed World Vision. I went to every natural disaster and human-made disaster, war and conflict, really on the planet. And in the trauma, chaos and confusion of those disasters, I was confronted with how people who survived them could find any hope to go and rebuild their lives. I remember the tsunami very dramatically, 2006 Boxing Day tsunami, and being up in Sri Lanka within 24 hours, I saw so many people in silence, traumatized, just staring out at the sea. They were hoping that that deathly wave that had taken their loved ones, and they hadn't found the body of their loved ones, might in fact be an illusion, be a wave that brought their loved ones miraculously back. I watched them as then the inevitability that their home was gone, their loved ones was gone, sunk in. And what were they going to do? What I discovered was that faith was profoundly important. Up in Sri Lanka, Buddhist faith and Hindu faith, in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, Muslim faith. Again and again, I heard people say, if I can't believe in God or my gods, I can't even have the strength to get out of bed tomorrow. Certainly not have the strength to start rebuilding my lives. Not just burying and grieving my loved ones, but getting on to rebuild for those who are still alive. I was really struck by how faith was the resource, the most vulnerable, the poorest people who'd suffered the greatest tragedies. Faith was the only resource they had. I was certainly struck in communicating back here in Australia, journalists asking me questions saying, well, where's God? And how could you believe in God who's all loving and all powerful when this disaster has happened? What struck me about the Australian perspective was we were so self-sufficient, so invulnerable, that we thought we actually have got this nailed, and we had the luxury to say, where is God? And almost get angry. Well, faith in the context of disaster for those suffering it, faith wasn't a luxury, an indulgence. Faith actually was essential to find the hope after grieving to go on with life. So over my long World Vision career, going to all the world's disasters, I've seen that pattern repeated, that faith is fundamental in crisis. Faith gives meaning. Faith builds community. Faith gives hope and purpose to say, I can go on. I'm not alone in this universe. Well, what does that mean with this particular crisis, the coronavirus crisis? We've seen extremes, haven't we? The extremes of panic and fighting in our supermarkets over toilet paper. We've seen at the other end, utter indifference. People on the beaches at Bondi and Manly and packing out pubs, indifferent, saying, I'm invulnerable, it won't touch me, and I'm young and healthy. We've seen panic and we've seen indifference. I think what faith at its best does is remind us that no one is invulnerable. The Bible that I read daily, which are the Hebrew scriptures, Christians call it the Old Testament, are about the terrible loss and grief of Jerusalem, the temple, the people of Israel who are scattered into exile. And the prophets talk about this being a loss for God, the tremendous loss of God and grief of God for God's people, for God's temple, because of them violating God's laws. But the grief isn't just human grief, it's also God's grief. That's very important for me in crisis, that with the coronavirus, God, the God I believe in, is equally grieving at the loss and the suffering and the tragedy. When I think about invincibility, I think 9/11 in America was bigger than just 3,000 people who lost their lives. Terrible. It was bigger than just the Twin Towers coming down. In America, it was the loss of invincibility. The utter shock where America felt we are powerful, we are self-sufficient, things like this cannot happen to us. Well, what my faith teaches me is that loss and grief have to be owned. If loss and grief aren't dwelt upon, if there isn't lament and real emotional owning of the grief, unowned grief can lead to denial, and it can lead to anger, and it can lead to blaming of so many others. Grief and loss, when it's owned, and I saw this in all the disasters I have visited, and when it's put into a faith perspective, grief and loss actually can lead to resilience, to hope again, to finding the energy and strength to actually go on. This is why faith is important to me in crisis. What the coronavirus certainly has shown us is that in this crisis, no one is invincible. We are all vulnerable. Home Security Minister Peter Dutton gets it, the coronavirus. The Health Minister in Britain, Tom Hanks. In other words, the virus doesn't distinguish between the rich and the powerful politically and the great. It reminds us we are all vulnerable. Humans have often tried to have a story of why they're superior to someone else. It might be their caste is superior, their class and economic standing is superior to someone, their postcode, the car they drive, that sense of often men thinking they're superior to women. We've often had a story to tell about ourselves that somehow we're self-sufficient. Well, my faith has always said, no, we are all vulnerable. No one is superior, no one is inferior. The coronavirus reminds us of our total invulnerability. And I think in this moment, it needs to be a coming together to say, there is loss. I can't just go down to my favourite coffee shop and sit down and read the paper like I do each morning. I have to socially distance. I think it's far better actually to use the term spatially distance, because actually I want to be socially more connected. I know that for many in our community before the coronavirus, there was terrible loneliness. In fact, health studies tell us loneliness kills people even in greater rates than smoking and other things that we know kill people. Well, an epidemic of loneliness probably was here even before the coronavirus. I don't want more loneliness. I don't want more social distancing. I want people connecting, dropping a note, leaving a meal if someone's actually ill on their doorstep. Absolutely being careful to not spread the virus, absolutely in spatial distancing, but not socially. To actually see that faith at its best brings communities together to say, you're not invisible. We know your name. We see you. You matter. For me, faith is saying God sees me and I matter. And I think that's the most fundamental question humans have. Do I actually matter? So I don't want social distancing that renders people even more invisible and lonely. Well, with this virus, we need to come together. We need in coming together to say we will be stronger together. That's it for today. Remember to join in one of the discussions we've got coming up. You'll find it there on the Stronger Together website. So I look forward to chatting with you. Above all, stay safe, be well, live strong. Follow all the health advice and take care of yourselves, take care of others. Let's prevent the spread of this virus. Let's be stronger together.